Good evening. There is an interesting statistic that 30% of Americans have been by a therapist the last 2 years. 30%. It doesn't mean that this statistic, 30%, are psychotic or have a serious mental disorder, because it's not necessarily so. Today people go to a psychiatrist to speak things through. We're not necessarily a psychiatrist, a psychologist, a therapist, a social worker who has a degree in different types of therapies. There's, of course, the famous joke: what's the difference between a neurotic, a psychotic, and a psychiatrist? So the neurotic, he builds himself a castle in the sky. He's imagining things. So the neurotic builds himself a castle in the sky. The psychotic actually lives there. And the psychiatrist collects the rent.
One more time.
Now, neurosis is not a real disorder. Neurosis is a person who has what you call mishigas or shtick. So, for example, sadness, someone who's confused, he has guilt, and for those reasons, he's visiting a therapist. Or for some people, they're having certain feelings. They're not sure if they're normal feelings or they're healthy feelings. So for a reality check, they go to a therapist to see what's normal. And this all reflects human complexity in a Jewish sense or in a religious sense. This complexity involves the nature of good and evil. Today people go to therapy, and they go to a secular therapist more often than not. And we can call the issues discussed in this chapter of Tanya TT, Tanya therapy. And for some of the issues which cause stress on a person, and certainly what's called the normality check or the reality check, to understand this parak in Tanya will help. We're up to chapter 11, and it speaks about evil, which is an interesting, it's just something interesting in American law system. The Alter Rebbe lived about 250 years ago, close to 300 years ago. So chapter 11 of American law didn't mean anything. But it's interesting that evil, the Rasha, the man that's a Rasha, who is wicked, who is evil, that evil is in control, it's in chapter 11. Now, he starts the chapter, Perek Yud Aleph, V'zeh lu'umah zeh Rasha v'toiv lo lu'umah tzadik v'ra'ali. One counters the other, the Rasha and the tzaddik. The wicked, the one who has evil dominated, and the one who is dominated by good, the tzaddik. And this term zelu mazeh, that one mirrors the other, one is counters the other. We had it in the beginning, in an earlier chapter, I believe in chapter 6, when he spoke about the structure of the animal soul and the levushim of the animal soul, the actions, the garments, and so on. And here in chapter 11, he's speaking about how the tzaddik counters the rasha. And therefore, if there is tzaddik who's complex and has in himself some evil, there's going to be a Rasha. The one who has evil is going to have in him some good. And that's what he refers to Zeh L'Umazeh, evil counters good and good counters evil. And I think this is an important opening to this chapter, because this idea, Zeh L'Umazeh, and it's a term that's used many times in Tanya. It's based on a verse in Kehelis. And the idea is good and evil counter each other, and sometimes have a healthy clash, which is to bring out the better in us, to challenge us, to rise to the challenges of life. We spoke about that in the class of chapter 6 of Perek Vav. Over here I wanted to bring out, again, he brings this sentence, Zeh L'Umazeh, again, and in other places in Tanya in general, in the literature, you have this idea, Zeh L'Umazeh. I think it's important to think about it, because it's a message when we're looking at good, and it's a message when we're looking at evil. The message when we're looking at good is that when you see good, don't take good for granted. The Mishnah says, Al tamim ba'atzmecha ad yom ma'ischa. Don't believe in yourself until the day you die. A person can live an upright life, and years can go by doing always what's right, and then suddenly can have a total turnaround for evil. And this happens. Midlife crisis, other mishagas go into his head and turns it around. It's on an individual level, it could be on a communal level, it could be a family level. Therefore, you should know, when you see good around you, you see good in yourself, you should know Zeh L'Umazeh, that Hashem also has somewhere squirreled away, there is evil. So don't take yourself for granted, don't take good for granted. You always have to grow in Yiddishkeit, you always have to grow, and you have to be wary of the evil that lurks around or hidden. On the other hand, if you see evil, and you see the power of evil, you see that the wicked are powerful and successful, or even if you see yourself as being totally evil or oozing evil from all over, so you should know Zeh L'Umazeh, that countering the evil that's in you, there's good in you. It's Zeh L'Umazeh. The Gemara says, Kol mi shegadol mechaveiroi yitzrei gadol. The bigger the man is, the bigger his Yetzer Hara is. So someone who has a big neshama, so he has a big Yetzer Hara, big nefesh habamis. So therefore, wherever we're looking, we have to understand this Zeh L'Umazeh, and I believe that's why it's a frequent theme or a frequent line in the works of Tanya, or the Maimorim that deal with the inner struggle going in within ourselves, or the general struggle between good and evil in the world around us. And everything has a mixture of good and evil. Since Chet Eitz Hadas, since the first sin, the tree that brought evil in this world is called the tree of Eitz Hadas Toivera. And since then, everything in the world has some good and some evil. And therefore, he's going now specifically to these two personalities, the tzaddik personality and the rasha personality. And therefore, one counters the other. Rasha v'toiv lo lomas tzaddik v'rali. We spoke in chapter 10 about the personality of the tzaddik that still has in himself slight fraction, minute amount of evil. So even though practically speaking he's a tzaddik, but there's still some evil because he's not disgusted by evil, and which we learned at length in chapter 10, Perek Yud. So if we find complexity in the tzaddik, where even though it's a tzaddik, there's also some evil in him, so therefore, since one mirrors the other, therefore also the Rasha, when we're going to speak about the sinner, when we're going to speak about the person who's evil, there's also in his personality some good, but the good is not in control, but it's still there. And it is reflected, we're going to speak about how this is reflected by the Rasha, V'toivloi, the Rasha that has good in him. So these are the more complex personalities. The polar opposites are the tzaddik v'toivloi and the tzaddik v'ra, and the Rasha and raloi. The complete tzaddik and the complete Rasha. They are polar opposites. They are very clear, black and white. Then when we want to get into a more complex personality, we have on one hand the tzaddik who has some evil, and the Rasha who has some good. And that's what we're going to be speaking mostly about in chapter 11. The Hainu, so this personality of the Rasha who has good in him, Shatoiv shebenafshi elikish shebemoicha b'chalei amoni shebeliboi, kofuf ubotel l'gabi hara maklipa shebechol asmali. That's because the good that's in his godly soul is suppressed and voided and made insignificant by his animal soul, by the evil, the klipa that's on his left side. V'zeh meschalek gam ken l'rvavis madreges chaluka is be'inyan kamus ve'ichos habitul ukfifas hatoiv l'rachas v'sham. And there are tens of thousands of different levels in this type of a personality. This type of personality is considered a wicked, a sinner. But in the quality of the sin, in the quantity of his sinfulness, the quantity of his sins, and the quality of his sinfulness, there's tens of thousands of levels. And this is measured by how much of him is suppressed, how much of the good that's in him. He certainly has good in him, because he's called a Rasha v'toivloi. At the end of the chapter, he's going to talk about someone who's completely evil. But right now, we're talking about a person who sins, but he has in him, the godly soul is still functional and alive in him, but he still is not in control, certainly not in complete control. He's in partial control, the godly soul is partial control, and he's going to speak about these differences. And he's going to dissect some different type of personalities in this level of the Rasha v'toivloi. I must add that generally, most people, which is probably 99% and a fraction of people, are in the category of this chapter. Most people are not totally wicked. They're not a Rasha v'ralei. That is evil, and he's sinful, and there's no good in him. And this will become clear when we come to the end of the chapter, when he discusses that category. And most people are not tzaddikim, because they sin. And most people are not even a Beinoni, the level of in-between, which we'll be discussing in chapter 12. Most people are in this category. They sin, but they still have the godly soul. But their animal soul, the Yetzer Hara, the Nefesh HaBahamis, is in control to a smaller degree or a greater degree in them. So therefore, the variance between how much is evil in control of you, sometimes some people to a greater degree, some people to a lesser degree, and that's what this is all about. Now he uses the term kafuf ubatal. How much the good in him is kafuf ubatal to the evil. Kafuf literally means it's bent. His good is bent to the evil, or it's batal, it becomes nullified or void in the evil. What's the difference between these two terms? And he uses Eichos habitul o kfifas hatoiv l'ra. In one place he uses first kafuf, and then bitul, and then bitul and kafuf, of the good to the evil, chaz v'shalom. He uses the term chaz v'shalom, heaven forbid, that the good is subjugated by the evil, that's heaven forbid. But he has his two terms here. One is kafuf and the other is batal. I think one example to illustrate this would be a habit or his lifestyle. A habit, someone has a bad habit. He knows it's a bad habit. But he's not so much in control of himself to control his bad habit. He may control it sometimes. He may control it less times. But it's a bad habit. It's not that he's addicted to it. It's just a habit. So that would be kafuf. Kafuf is, he's bent, the evil side of him is in control of his good side in him, because he knows it's bad, but it's an habit. Practically speaking, he's going with that. So it's not, his good is not totally lost to it. If it becomes an addiction, and he doesn't even think about it, because he's totally surrendered to it, that would be batal. Kafuf means he has this habit, he's weak. It's a weakness, and he bends to the evil. When he's surrendered to the evil, that's already batal. So it's interesting, these two terms that he used, kafuf and batal. And each one of us can think about some, bad habits. They are just a habit. He does this sometimes, that times, but it's not that habit or that evil is he's totally surrendered to it. He's just kafuf to it. And then sometimes it's batal. And that's why he uses the term chaz v'sholem, that you're controlled by the evil that's in you. If a person's controlled by the evil that's in him, it's a chaz v'sholem. And now he's going to go into particulars how you measure various differences in the quantity or the quality of this subjugation, of how evil takes control of this person. Because if evil takes control of him, then that's called a rasha. A rasha is a person, in the context of Tanya, a rasha is a person who evil takes control of him. We're not talking about the term rasha in a conventional sense. When someone's really a wicked person, we say he's a rasha. He's cruel person. That's in the conventional sense of the term rasha. He's a rasha, he's a cruel person, a totally wicked person. That's not in the sense of the use which Tanya calls rasha. Which Tanya calls rasha could be an average person that we know, and the person that we know and look in the mirror is people who sins. What degree he sins, how often he sins, that is still a sinner. That's why 99% of people are sinners. Just the difference about how much. So he says, Yesh mi shakfifa v'abitl etzloi ma'at mi ze'er. There are some people that the evil controls them very little. But it controls them sometimes. Qualitatively and quantitatively. It does control them sometimes. So then, if you lose control to evil, that's already a rush. You're not a tzaddik. A tzaddik doesn't lose control. His subjugation, his bending his good, that his good side is bends, is kafuf to the evil, could be qualitatively a little, and it's not consistently, it's only sometimes, but and it's or maybe often. It could be sometimes, it could be often. Even if it's not often, even if it's once in a while, distant times apart, that his evil takes control of him, it's far apart. It's even if it would be far apart times, that his evil takes control of him and takes control of his body. Because we learned in chapter 9 that the whole creation is so that the nefesh, that the person should take control of his body. It's all about the body. Hashem created the world and He gave us Torah mitzvahs. How is our body going to live its life? That's what 613 mitzvahs are about. It's about physical things, but it's about the body. And the whole dynamics of the struggle between the good and the evil that's in us is over the body. Because the body is the life that Hashem created on this physical world. Now, what is the body doing? And what is motivating the body? And which persona that's in him? Is it the godly soul that's driving the body? Or is it the animal soul that's driving the body? The body, he used the term Merkava in the next line. Merkava is a wagon. Who's driving this wagon? The one who drives the wagon is in control of the wagon. The car isn't the problem. It's the driver that's the problem. You don't say, oh, this car is a crazy car because it's zigzagging on the road. The car is not a crazy car. It depends on the driver. It's the driver. The car is the body. What is driving our body? So if the evil that's in us is in control, he's driving us. He's the motivator of our actions. And he's controlling the body. So then he's a Rasha. To what degree? He's controlling partially, and a distant part. He's speaking on the finer level of this Rasha. A sinner who's on a finer level sinner. He's not a serial killer. He's not a serial sinner. He's doing it, subtle sins. But in this, for him, the evil is taking control for those moments. And even if qualitatively it's not such a terrible major sin. Even if the evil that's in him is not totally the driver of his car, only he's taking part of him partially. In a car, it's either you're driving or you're not driving. But we know that humans are much more complex than cars. And there could be several drivers and motivators in a person at the same time. And there are different aspects of his life and different moments in his life where 1 minute is like this, the next minute is like this. So he's now talking about the highest and finest level of this Rasha, this sinner. So once in a while, the evil takes control, but only partially. She is sharlam mashma'asei, v'nasalei merkava, and it becomes the driver of the wagon, so to say. So the evil in us, the animal soul, is now the driver. Ulevush v'eslabash boy echad meshleisha levusha. Now, we know in Tanya, he speaks about the 3 garments of the soul: the thought, the speech, and the action. So the soul is just a spirit. Now, how does the soul get around? It has to get dressed. with a body. And specifically gets dressed with different actions. The animal soul gets dressed with doing things in the physical world that are selfish or sinful. The godly soul gets dressed in doing things that are mitzvahs, that are good and that are holy. So, at that moment, to what degree? We're talking about the first level of the sinner. To what degree is his animal soul in control? To what degree is the evil in him in control? For example, it'll take over to do lighter sins that are not going to have the same weight which the more heavyweight sins. So he comes to do something that's heavyweight he won't do. Someone could commit adultery with his eyes, or he committed adultery in action. But if he's not watching his eyes, he may be committing adultery in a subtle way with his eyes. So his eyes are loose. His eyes are loose. Certainly it's not the same as committing adultery in the physical sense. So this is considered, let's say, he's doing an act, but he's doing it, and he's talking about action, not about thought over here, but an action that he'll do a sin that's more lighter, but something that's really bad he won't do. So he'll eat kosher, but certain things that are not kosher, no is a no by him. But certain things that are light is not. And this may be a trick of the sly Eitzahara, the evil, can be playing with us. This is a small thing. So it is the truth. Torah halacha says that there's heavyweight sins and there's lighter sins. But nevertheless, if he allows any sins to happen with him, and he commits any of the sins, so he's allowing the evil in him drive him, and he's a sinner, even if it's a lightweight sin. Or it could be he'll never do an action that is forbidden, but his speech, he says, I'm never going to do something like that, but I'll talk about something that I'm not allowed to talk about. So, for example, it says, "Ladaber avak lashon hara v'letzanis ukay gavner." This forbidden speech, you're not supposed to speak bad about other people, to make another person to have a bad name. That's lashon hara, even if it's the truth. You could, by speaking negatively about a person, you can ruin his career, you can ruin friendships, you can ruin a marriage. That's lashon hara. So that is clearly forbidden. But in halacha, there's also what's called the powder of lashon hara, the dust of lashon hara. So, in a conversation, we're talking about, someone says, Joe. Oh, I heard Joe's is getting married. Okay. So then you know some bad stuff about Joe. So you're not going to say lashon hara about him to say that, he's a cheater. But you'll say, I don't want to, Joe's getting married. Don't ask me about Joe. I don't want to speak about Joe. Once he says, I don't want to speak about Joe, that is called the dust of lashon hara. Even if you don't say any negative information, but you're giving the impression that there's something wrong with him, that's called avak lashon hara. So this guy is a really strict guy with himself. He never speaks lashon hara. He'll never badmouth a person. But he did hint that there is something to badmouth about him. That's already a sin. So that's what he does. Well, Litzanis is always, making fun, mockery, taking life lightly. Everything is a joke. So life is one big joke. So he's saying words, this, that, tefillin, this tefillin, that tefillin, whatever. And he's making a mockery of it. That is through speech. Even if his sin is just in thought. He have thoughts of sin. No, he's thinking about doing a sin. Thoughts of sin doesn't mean necessarily he's planning and plotting how could he sin, or imagining himself actually sinning. Even if he's thinking sexual thoughts about, in general, not about actually doing a sin or himself sinning. It's not even, he's not imagining sin, but he's thinking these lewd thoughts. That is old, so it's thought. So he's not thinking of any sin. He's thinking about what someone could argue is human nature. But the Gemara says that it's forbidden to think about these things and get in your brain totally immersed in it. If it happens that a thought enters your mind like this, which it's natural for a person to have his instincts put the thoughts of such type of thoughts into his head, so he should push them aside. But if he's thinking again, and even if he's not thinking of actually sinning, it's also forbidden. The Gemara says you should guard yourself from everything evil. And the Gemara says, what does it mean? Guard yourself from everything that's evil, even evil thoughts of evil, and even such lewd thoughts. The Gemara says it refers to. So here he spoke about, and let's analyze this. He's analyzing the person whose thoughts are evil in a subtle way. His speech is evil in a refined way. And his actions, his sins, are so to say, lighter sins. If we look at the category and the list of sins, it's from the lighter sins, and it would never enter his mind to do this. Nevertheless, he's still in the category of a rasha. Now, why is he not doing heavyweight sins? Because there's good in him. Why is he not speaking really foul language or harmful language, real lashon hara? Because he's an upright man. Why is he not thinking thoughts that are forbidden to think? Deeper thoughts, more graver things to do, sins. He's only sinning in his thought. He's only sinning, let's say, with his eyes, and he's not acting out on the thoughts that come into his head. That's because he has a godly soul. And the godly soul is in control of him. So that means he has toiv, he has good in him. And it's only for lighter things that he surrenders, or he bows to the evil that's in him. So that again, you see the complexity of this person. You ask this person, are you a good person or you're an evil person? Are you a rasha or are you a tzaddik? So look at this. He'll never do anything a heavyweight sin. Chamuris, dvarim chamurim. He will never do. Averis chamura, he will never do. Chaz v'shol, heaven forbid. What kind of person do you think I am? But in thought he sins. With his eyes he may sin. Or in thought he sins. So this is a person who most people, I would say most people speak lashon hara, even though it's harmful for other people. But this person's really, you could say, at a high level. And in conventional conversation, people say, oh, this guy's a tzaddik. Why is he a tzaddik? Because he doesn't speak lashon hara, but he speaks avak lashon hara. Why is he tzaddik? In American society, a person's a good citizen if he doesn't have a criminal record. So you have no criminal record, you're a good citizen. But what's going on inside doesn't make a difference. But you don't have a criminal record. So here we're talking about this Rasha, and we're saying that he's good. So it's clearly that this good is more often than not in control of him. But if he didn't control himself to be a tzaddik, so that means the good in him can be subjugated to the evil, and the evil can be the driver in him. He's still not a tzaddik. He's not even a Beinoni. Because we're going to learn in the next chapter, a Beinoni is somebody who has total control of his actions. He's not in control of his feelings. In other words, he has lust in his heart, he has jealousy in his heart, he may have anger in his heart, but he doesn't let those feelings become expressed in action or even in thought to contemplate, how am I going to get even with the other person? But these thoughts do come in his mind. But if he acts out on these thoughts, even in thought, he's saying over here, he is still the category of Rasha v'Toivle. So the three examples he used before, he just used, are about evil, about negative things. How not so often these more subtle type of sins he gets involved in. The evil that's him pushes him to do that. But now he's going to say, even if it's not something negative, but the failure of doing something positive, that's also a failing. For example, he has time to learn now, and everyone has a lot of time on their hands, and he's not learning. Today is Hey Tavis. Today was Hey Tavis. The Rebbe said on this day, people should buy books, Torah books. Everyone has to have Torah books in his house. Everyone has to have a Torah library in his house. Why do you have to have a Torah library? So when you come in and out, you see the books, you'll open a book, you'll open a sefer, you have a chumash, you'll say chumash, you have a Tanya. Everyone should have a Tanya in their house. Well, you have all these svarim, and then you'll learn. Because now, if you have time to learn and you can't learn, and you're not learning, you're wasting your time. So then, that is also a sin. That means the evil in you is driving you to watch television, to watch this, to watch that, instead of learning Torah. It says in Pirkei Avos that someone who has an opportunity to study Torah, and he pushes his heart turns to Narishkeiten, like it says in Pirkei Avos, he's up at night, cruising television, the internet, all Narishkeiten. So it's also a sinner. At the moment when he's doing that, he's a Rasha. Because that moment when he's saying Avak Lashon Hara, at that moment he's a Rasha. He's going to do tshuva 5 minutes later. We're learning the Geras tshuva. We're learning how you do tshuva. He's going to do tshuva 5 minutes later. And then the tshuva could be a good tshuva, and he's going to be considered a tzaddik later. But we have to know those moments when we do something that's wrong, we become driven and motivated and controlled by evil, by klippa, by sitra achara. We become a car, an instrument of the evil that's in the world. That is what is so negative about sin. And even if he's going to do tshuva 5 minutes later, and even if he's not going to sin for the next few months, but that moment that he is doing even these lightweight sins, at that moment he still has so much good to him, but what's in control in part of him, maybe it's only in his thoughts. His actions are good, and he's holding himself back, and he's refraining, and abstaining from doing a physical forbidden act, but his head, in his mind, in his thought, the evil is in control. So the evil is driving part of him, is driving his thoughts. So at that moment, he becomes an instrument for the forces of evil in this world. And it does count in the eyes of Hashem. So this is not a terrible guy, but at that moment, he's a sinner. And to a certain degree, he's a sinner that's equal to a sinner who's doing a heavyweight sin. Why? Because at that moment, he's not, doing a terrible thing. And qualitatively, you can't compare the two, but there is a common denominator between the two. There's evil in this world. There's evil in us. And the whole mission of our mission in this world as individuals, and as the mission that we have in this world, is to make the world a dwelling for Hashem and bring Mashiach. A world is worth a Mashiach. So even if we allow ourselves for that moment to be dominated and controlled by evil, so that moment we're helping bring more evil to the world. And it could be that if it's a person that is of a higher level, it's a bigger desecration, because from him was expected to be better. Because the evil that's inside of him takes control, and it uses his body as an instrument for evil. Later on, he regrets this, and he's going to ask for forgiveness. And Hashem will forgive him. So even though this person sins in long intervals, but when he's sinning, he's a rasha, even lightweight sins. The only question of this type of person is in quality and in quantity of sins. So he says he sins. Some people sin every day. Some people sin 10 times a day. Some people sin once in a while. But there's a common denominator between all of them. All of them are what the Tanya calls a rasha v'toivlei, a good person, but the rasha, he acts sin, and he is one of the instruments of the forces of evil in this world. That's why he's not a tzaddik, he's not even a beinin. So you have the first category of a person qualitatively, it's more subtle, and not so often, and he does tshuva after every sin, and he does it according to what the Chazal say. There are 3 different levels of sins, and there's 3 different levels of tshuva, which the Gemara speaks about, and there's a whole section of Tanya, the 3rd section of Tanya, the Geras Tshuva, that speaks about this. So this is the more refined level. Yesh mishara goyver by yoyse mislapshim by kol shloisha levushim shalara machtiya baveres chamuris yoyse rabitim krev yoyse. Then there's some people who they're totally immersed in evil, their thought and their speech and their action, right? So how much of him is not controlled by his godly soul? Not his mind, not his thought, not his speech. His whole head is in trash. His speech is so foul and disgusting. And action, he's acting out, doing crazy things. And it could be not only a habit, but an addiction. So he's completely not in control. But in between, he regrets. He has regrets. So he has regrets. So the person who's a sinner, who's not in control of himself, his evil is in control of him. So that person, and is most of the times, or almost all of the times, but he still has regrets. Why do this again? Every day, every hour, he says, I shouldn't have done it. So he still has a conscience, right? He still has a conscience. So the thoughts of tshuva are always with him. Between sin and sin, he has regrets. He has regrets. He's always doing tshuva. It's interesting about tshuva. The Baal Tshuva is always doing tshuva. Why? Because he's always sinning. So he's sinning tshuva, sinning tshuva, sinning tshuva, sinning tshuva. So okay, fine. He's not a Baal Tshuva because he's not in control. So he says, the good doesn't take complete control of him to abandon sin. He can't abandon sin. So you have these two, Valzeh Amr Razal, Hashem Aleim Charates, Shem Roi Varashem Shes B'chem Tov B'nafsh Madayim. Most people, most sinners have regrets. That's something that is very important. They talk about guilt. Is guilt healthy? Is guilt healthy? So a lot of the secular therapists, no, guilt is not healthy. Guilt makes stress. If you have guilt, you're going to have stress, and if you have stress, it's no good. And you're going to be sad, and you're going to be depressed, and all that. In Judaism, guilt is healthy. Not that you should become depressed, that you should do something about it. Guilt, if guilt brings you to depression, it's not a healthy guilt. The difference between this sinner and a total loser, total sinner, a Rasha Gomer, the complete Rasha, is guilt. Someone who has no guilt, he lost it completely. That's where the secularists are against guilt. That's where the German philosopher Nietzsche, he was making fun of guilt. He said guilt is fiction. That's why Hitler adored Nietzsche. Because Hitler preached to the German people, don't have guilt, have power. And Nietzsche said, guilt is the manipulation of weaker people. He was, of course, referring to the Jews. Jews gave the Torah to the world. Jews gave a message for conscience, for right and wrong. So Nietzsche said that's all fiction. If you have no guilt, you have no sense of right and wrong. And if you do wrong and you have no guilt, then you lost your neshama. Almost. So therefore, he spoke about two general categories of this Rasha v'Toivlei, of this person who has evil, who does evil, but he still has good in him. Sometimes the evil is in total control, but he has regrets in between. That's a sign of life that there's still good in him. And sometimes he has most, or some of these people are mostly in control. The good is in control. But sometimes they just, every few months, once a year, once a day, where they lose control and they surrender their control to the forces of evil. So therefore they're still in the category of Rasha. What happens if someone has no regrets? He's a complete Rasha. Someone who never has regrets, never has thoughts of tshuva for whatever he does, is a complete Rasha. He's a Rasha, has only evil in him. Because what's left in him is just evil. Everyone is born with a godly soul, and everyone is born with inherent good, but because he was so immersed, total immersion in thought and speech and action, and he has no more, and to the degree that he killed his soul, so to say. He has no guilt. He is a complete Rasha. Nevertheless, the Alter Rebbe says, even this guy who's oozing evil, and even if he's such a person that doesn't even recognize that it's evil, and he never has regrets, still there is his godly soul is there on a certain subconscious level, which he calls makif. It's hovering there above him. You can't totally shake off. You can't totally shake off your godly soul. The Gemara says, on all 10 Jews, the Shekhinah is there. Because this is halacha, when you have 10 Yidna together, there's a level of holiness in 10 godly souls coming together. The Shekhinah's presence is there. That's why we can make a minyan. Why can we make a minyan? Because the Shekhinah's presence is there. So we can make a minyan. So the wording of the Gemara is, Akol be'asara. All 10 Jews, or any 10 Jews. But wait a minute, this guy is a Rasha. He never feels guilt in his life. He killed his soul, supposedly. Nistalik Mikir, Tanya says, it was removed from him. Nevertheless, it's there, it's right there hovering above him. And that's why the Rebbe taught us, any Jew, no matter what he looks like, even if he never has any sense of Yiddishkeit in his heart, there's nefesh elokis somewhere. What does it mean, hovering? In psychological terms, his neshama is still hovering. It's subconscious. Consciously, he killed his soul, so to say. But halachically, you can't totally kill your soul. You can push it aside, you can bury it, you can't kill it. You can put nistalik mikir by. You pushed it aside, you pushed it out of your system. It's out of your head, you don't feel guilt. You don't feel guilt, but it's somewhere. Subconsciously it's still there. And then when a Lubavitcher boy comes to you and he says to you, are you Jewish? So if enough of Lubavitcher kids are going to tell him, are you Jewish? Are you Jewish? Are you Jewish? Are you Jewish? He says, all these kids are asking me every week, I'm Jewish. That means I'm still Jewish. I never thought it. And that's what he's saying here in Tanya. Have a good night.